Flight attendant laughs at poor passenger, gasps when he reveals he's a judge. Welcome to a story about appearances, pride, and the revelations that occur when a single flight puts hidden truths on full display. In this tale, our protagonist, a flight attendant, confident in her social graces and quick judgments, encounters a passenger who seems to lack the means of her more affluent flyers. Unbeknownst to her, that poor passenger conceals a powerful secret that could change not only her perspective, but her entire future. Before the aircraft touches down, unexpected twists and immediate karma will reshape how everyone aboard perceives status, worth, and humility. Buckle up and prepare for a dramatic flight that ascends toward a lesson none will soon forget. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. It was 6:30 a.m. at New York's LaGuardia Airport, and the terminal thrummed with the usual cacophony of early morning travelers, luggage wheels clattering on polished floors, overhead announcements sounding boarding calls, and the chatter of impatient passengers hoping to catch their flights on time. Running a hand through her neatly pinned brunette hair, flight attendant Carmen sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, trying to start her day. She'd worked for Star Airlines for 7 years. Typically, she prided herself on maintaining composure even during the most hectic flight schedules. But this particular morning had started poorly. First, her alarm had failed to ring, forcing her into a frantic dash to the subway, only to discover the line was delayed. Then she slipped on a puddle outside the airport entrance and twisted her ankle, leaving a subtle throb nagging at her each time she shifted her weight. Adding insult to injury, she was assigned to a last-minute cross-country route from LaGuardia to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport with a layover in Chicago. O'Hare, an exhausting itinerary that would stretch well into the night. She couldn't help feeling that everything was conspiring to keep her off balance. When Carmen finally made it to Star's staff lounge, she discovered she was late for the briefing. Her supervisor, Patricia, was already halfway through detailing the flight. The Boeing 737 was fully booked. Additional staff had been cut for cost-saving measures, so the remaining flight attendants would have to handle extra duties. Carmen frowned. Fewer hands meant more passenger demands, more stress, and inevitably more chances for tension or mishaps. Patricia also mentioned they were trialing new in-flight purchase options, everything from Wi-Fi to upgraded snack boxes. The day was shaping up to be long and complicated. Rushing to gate C-14, Carmen found a sea of passengers waiting to board. She forced a bright smile, quickly scanned the manifest on her tablet, and began letting first-class and priority travelers through. Already she felt her throat tighten, anticipating the swirl of complaints about overhead bin space, cramped seats, and meal preferences. Determined not to let her sour morning define her entire day, she reminded herself, professionalism above all. Boarding commenced in the usual wave, first class, then families, then Group A, B, and so forth. Carmen stood at the aircraft door to greet people, while 2 other attendants, Devin and Laura, escorted passengers to their seats, helped with luggage, and responded to immediate requests. Carmen encountered a spectrum of personalities and moods, cheerful tourists excited for Seattle, stressed business travelers, grandparents carrying homemade snacks, a couple with a crying infant. Her standard lines rolled off her tongue. Welcome aboard, seats are to the left, enjoy your flight, repeated 100 times. Halfway through boarding, she noticed a man who looked particularly out of place in the throng. He appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s, wearing a threadbare tweed blazer with frayed elbows, a collared shirt that had lost its crispness, and shoes with clearly worn soles. Clutched in his hand was a tattered briefcase, the kind with scuff marks that told countless stories of use. His graying hair was combed back, and small glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He moved unhurriedly, as though immune to the chaos around him. He paused in the aisle, checking his boarding pass. "Excuse me," he said quietly, catching Carmen's attention. "Is row 22F toward the rear of the aircraft?" There was a gentle quality to his voice. Carmen offered a brisk nod, not particularly interested. "Yes, all the way back. Window seat." The man smiled with a slight nod of thanks. Carmen thought he seemed polite enough, then turned her attention to the next passenger. Moments later, though, she glimpsed him struggling with the overhead bin. His long coat fell over his head, and he fumbled awkwardly with his seat assignment printout. Normally, Carmen might have stepped forward to assist, but in that moment, a passenger in row 2 flagged her for help with a medical bag. By the time she refocused on the man in the tweed blazer, he had somehow managed to stow his coat and was squeezing into his seat. The last passengers boarded, the cabin door closed. The plane taxied to the runway, and soon they were in the air. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a chime, and Carmen rose to begin her safety compliance checks. Striding down the aisle, she verified that seatbelts were fastened and tray tables raised. She paused briefly at row 22, noticing the man had dozed off with his head against the window, arms folded over his chest. She spotted something else too, a worn wallet peeking from the outside pocket of his old briefcase. The edges of the wallet were tattered, like it had seen years of heavy use. She repressed a small sneer. He must not have much money for a new wallet or decent clothes, she thought. The tiny sting of judgment pricked her mind. He looks more like a charity case than a typical E-Star passenger. She moved on, forcing the thought away. After all, it wasn't her concern if a passenger had limited means, but fate had its own sense of irony. The flight was running behind schedule, fueling tension and short tempers. Meanwhile, Carmen received a curt message via the flight's interphone from the captain. They'd face a bit of turbulence soon. She sighed. Turbulence usually triggered anxious call lights from passengers. True to form, the calls started flashing. Carmen's day was about to get more complicated. Sure enough, once the seatbelt sign illuminated due to mild turbulence, a half-dozen passengers tried summoning flight attendants for last-minute requests. One wanted water, another demanded a blanket, a third questioned seat upgrades, and 2 people insisted they needed to use the restroom. Carmen and Devin scurried around, doing their best to maintain order. Laura, tasked with managing the new in-flight purchase system, wheeled a small cart loaded with premium snack boxes, headphones, and Wi-Fi access vouchers. The airline had begun monetizing many of the standard services. Passengers could pay by credit card or exact cash. Because of a glitch in their card reader system, the attendants had to juggle phone-based payment apps, which proved both slow and confusing. Soon, a line of impatient passengers formed, complaining about having to pay extra for items that were once free. Carmen, scanning the cabin, spotted the man in the tweed blazer, rummaging in his battered briefcase. He extracted a slim coin pouch. Is he trying to buy something? She wondered. She decided to investigate. Approaching row 22, she observed him frowning at the laminated in-flight menu. The expression on his face was one of uncertainty. "Can I help you?" she asked. Arching an eyebrow, he looked up, startled. "Oh, hello. I was looking at the Wi-Fi fees and snack box prices. I'm not sure how I can pay. I have some cash, but it might not be enough. And I'm not sure if my phone's payment app is set up for this airline." Carmen's lips twitched. He can't even figure out how to pay. An uncharitable voice in her mind rolled its eyes. Aloud, she forced a courteous tone. "We can accept exact change for purchases under $10, or you can use your phone with our payment portal. If you're uncomfortable using the app, maybe stick to the complimentary beverage." His eyes dropped to the menu. "I see. Just curious, how much is the Wi-Fi pass?" "It's $15, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Cash or digital payment?" He sighed, rifling through his pouch. "I only have about $10 in small bills." A flicker of embarrassment crossed his face. He looked truly disappointed, as though he had an important reason for wanting to access Wi-Fi. "Never mind, I suppose," he murmured. Without thinking, Carmen let out a quick laugh, short but noticeable. It wasn't an overt cackle, yet the condescending tone was unmistakable. "I guess you'll have to wait until we land," she said. "On the bright side, at least you can enjoy your free soda." Then, pivoting away, she hustled down the aisle, leaving him sitting there, cheeks reddening. The plane jolted. Carmen was just passing an occupied cart when a sudden dip in altitude knocked her off balance. She stumbled forward, hooking the edge of the cart to keep from hitting the floor. Unfortunately, the cart lurched, flinging a half-open soda can in her direction. The icy liquid splashed all over her uniform skirt and blouse. She gasped in shock, feeling the cold seep through the material. Nearby passengers snickered or stared with concern. Immediately, Carmen's cheeks burned in humiliation. She tried to collect herself, grabbing napkins to blot her dripping clothes. Great, just great, she thought. This day keeps getting worse. She shot a quick, embarrassed glance at the back rows, only to notice the man in row 22 watching quietly, an unreadable expression on his face. Was that pity or disapproval? She couldn't tell. Flustered, she hurried to the galley to clean up. In that moment, she couldn't help reflecting on the karma of it all. She had sneered at a passenger's financial constraints, only to have an immediate, embarrassing mishap. The memory of her callous little laugh rang in her ears. Brushing it off, she resolved to change out of her soiled uniform as soon as possible. But she had no spare. She'd have to endure the flight with a sticky dampness on her blouse. "Serves me right," an inner voice whispered. She ignored it. A familiar face from first class. As the flight wore on, Carmen mostly avoided row 22. She allowed Devin or Laura to handle that section. Meanwhile, she attended to a demanding first-class traveler who insisted on special meal accommodations. But by the time the plane touched down for the short layover at Chicago O'Hare, Carmen spotted a slight commotion at the rear. Passengers stood in the aisle, collecting their carry-ons. A slender woman in business attire was speaking to the man in tweed, a look of startled recognition on her face. "Judge Howard? I haven't seen you in ages," the woman exclaimed, her voice carrying. "What brings you here?" Carmen froze. "Judge Howard?" She tried to listen discreetly. The man's name was apparently Howard, and this businesswoman recognized him as a judge. But he looked so unassuming. Her curiosity piqued. She maneuvered closer. The woman introduced herself as Julia Sampson, an attorney from New York. "I sat in first class," she said. "I didn't even know you were on board. You should have told me. I would have swapped seats or offered you my Wi-Fi code or something. We have so much to catch up on." Judge Howard, if that was indeed who he was, merely smiled. "I wouldn't dream of inconveniencing you. I'm perfectly fine back here." Carmen's pulse quickened. He was a judge? As in a legal authority with considerable influence? She vaguely recalled hearing of some Judge Howard from the New York Supreme Court in a news article, but her memory was fuzzy. She inched closer, pretending to help with the overhead bin, trying to confirm her suspicions. The disembarking continued, and Carmen soon found herself at the exit again, half-dazed by this revelation. People gradually deplaned, stepping into the bustling corridor of O'Hare's Terminal 3. Carmen spotted the businesswoman and Judge Howard conversing by the gate window. She didn't want to eavesdrop openly, but curiosity gnawed at her. She lingered near the door, scanning for stray items left on seats, all the while straining to catch bits of their conversation. Keeping a low profile, she heard him say, "I'm traveling to Seattle for a judicial conference. My flight from New York was last minute, so I took whatever seat was available. Plus, I don't mind economy. It's humbling." Julia Sampson chuckled. "You've always been so modest, Your Honor. But you deserve better accommodations. Let me at least buy you lunch during the layover." Carmen felt a chill. Your Honor. The man she had teased for not affording Wi-Fi was indeed a judge, a figure typically addressed with respect, recognized for wisdom and authority. Guilt crashed through her. She remembered the condescending laugh she'd given him. If he complains to the airline, I could face disciplinary action, or worse. She dreaded the possibility that he might mention her sarcasm to some higher up who recognized him. Judges had connections, reputations traveled far. During the short layover, the flight attendants were supposed to remain near the gate, preparing for the second leg to Seattle. Carmen felt uneasy, as if she stood on shaky ground. She filled an empty water bottle from a fountain, ignoring the stares from passers-by who might notice her stained uniform. I should apologize, she thought. But how? A small voice of pride in her mind argued, he never even told you he was a judge. Why would he hide that? Another, more honest voice countered, he's not obligated to announce who he is. You were rude. Full stop. She sighed, pressing a hand to her temple. The swirl of her mixed emotions and the day's stress hammered at her. About 30 minutes before reboarding, Carmen decided to wander the concourse, hoping to find a quick fix for her damp uniform. She found a small shop selling tourist T-shirts. Grimacing at the tackiness of the design, bright letters reading Chicago, she purchased one. Better an odd T-shirt than a sticky uniform. She ducked into a restroom, changed quickly, then tried rinsing her uniform's blouse in the sink. The best she could do was wring out the soda residue, leaving a faint stain. She stuffed it in a plastic bag. Emerging in the touristy T-shirt and her uniform skirt, she felt ridiculous. But at least it was better than the sticky mess. Back at Gate Letton, boarding commenced for the second leg from Chicago O'Hare to Seattle. Carmen took up her position at the aircraft door once more, plastering on a polite smile. The Boeing 737 would carry mostly the same passengers, though some had ended their journey in Chicago. A few new travelers joined. She scanned the manifest and noticed Howard Frederick, seat 22F, continuing on the flight. Her pulse fluttered. Frederick Howard. As he entered, Judge Howard gave her a cordial nod but said nothing. She felt her cheeks heat. Surely he recognizes me. Yet he didn't mention the earlier incident. Carmen exhaled, uncertain if that was good or bad. The flight departed Chicago at noon, scheduled to arrive in Seattle around 3 p.m. local time. Carmen tried to bury her concerns in her duties, cabin checks, announcements, and meal service prep. Meanwhile, her mind churned over her next steps. Should I offer him a free snack box or Wi-Fi code as an apology? That might breach airline policy, but perhaps it was the right gesture. Or do I just come clean, admit I was rude, and apologize face to face? She felt an increasing urgency to rectify the situation before the flight ended. An hour into the flight, trouble struck. The captain announced they'd be circling over Montana due to severe weather near the Rockies. The potential reroute or hold pattern meant adding at least 30 minutes to their journey, possibly more. Groans erupted from passengers. Carmen's stomach sank. Delays equaled more complaints, more stress, and a higher risk of confrontation. Sure enough, call lights blinked with demands for updates. Children grew restless, and the business travelers grumbled about missed connections. Carmen hurried along the aisle with water cups and offers of extra snacks. She paused near row 22, noticing Judge Howard had a worried expression. He tapped the seat in front of him as if impatient. Summoning courage, Carmen asked, "Is everything all right, sir?" He hesitated, then sighed. I need to check my emails. This delay might cause me to miss a preliminary briefing in Seattle. But I suppose it can't be helped. He pulled out his phone, fumbled with the payment portal again, and shook his head. I don't want to bother you about the Wi-Fi again. This was Carmen's chance to show contrition. Just do it, she told herself. Actually, sir, allow me to see if I can assist with that, she said, trying to keep her voice earnest. We might be able to set you up, and you can pay once you're online. Some exceptions can be made in special circumstances. That last bit was mostly an invention on her part, but eStar had certain latitude for VIP or emergency situations. He's basically a VIP, right? He blinked, surprised. That's quite generous. Thank you, but I don't want you breaking rules on my account. Let me check with my supervisor, Carmen offered. Her gut twisted. She hoped Patricia would be too busy to object. Carmen found Patricia by the galley, who was busy inventorying leftover meals. Patricia was in no mood for special favors. She scowled at Carmen's suggestion. Comped Wi-Fi? We can't do that. We have strict guidelines. Lowering her voice, Carmen explained, he's an important figure. He's a judge. He has urgent emails to send. The system is messing up his payment. This flight's delayed, and he might be missing a critical conference. Please, just this once, Patricia sighed. Look, do we have any official directive on offering courtesy to judges? No. We do it for active military sometimes. Is he wearing a uniform? No. Is he a frequent flyer with special status? Not in the system. But fine, I'll allow it if you handle the paperwork. If it backfires, it's on you. Elation and relief mingled in Carmen's chest. Thank you. She rushed back to row 22, ignoring the pain in her twisted ankle, ignoring the amused stares at her T-shirt uniform top. Sir, she said softly, I got approval. We'll give you access, and if there's a billing glitch, we'll sort it out later. Just let me set it up for you. The judge's eyes lit with gratitude. He handed her his phone. Carefully, she toggled the Wi-Fi portal, inputting a bypass code that staff used for certain emergency comps. She handed the phone back. It should work now. Testing a few taps, he smiled. I'm in. This is a lifesaver. Thank you, miss. Carmen, she supplied, cheeks flushing. I'm sorry for any inconvenience earlier. He nodded, expression gracious. You're doing your best under difficult circumstances. Thank you, Carmen. Her chest fluttered at his kindness, and a part of her wanted to blurt out a full apology for mocking him. But with passengers shifting in the aisle, she had only a moment. He turned his attention to his phone, typing a flurry of messages. A tense mid-flight encounter. With Judge Howard occupied, Carmen resumed her tasks. The flight continued to experience mild turbulence, stirring passenger anxiety. One especially agitated traveler in row 20 demanded an immediate seat upgrade to first class, claiming he was claustrophobic. When told no seats remained, he launched into a tirade. Carmen tried to de-escalate, but the man cursed at her, calling the airline incompetent. Shaken, she retreated, leaving Devin to handle the meltdown. She passed by row 22 again. The judge was so engrossed in his phone that he barely noticed. Carmen realized she felt an odd yearning for his approval, as though each kind act or reassurance from him might absolve her earlier cruelty. I need to say the words I'm sorry, she told herself, and mean it. But how to find a private moment? Just then, a frantic alarm sounded from the galley. Carmen spun on her heel, heart leaping. Devin and Laura rushed forward, explaining that a small child had spilled juice near an electrical panel. It triggered a false sensor reading, but they needed to check if any real damage occurred. The pilot signaled for the flight attendants to prepare for a possible diversion if the panel was compromised. The child's parents were mortified. The kid was crying, and half the cabin was stirring with speculation. For the next 20 minutes, Carmen joined the scramble to contain the spill, reassure the parents, and coordinate with the cockpit. The plane, still battling storms, navigated a bumpy path. At last, the pilot announced that the sensor had reset. They'd continue to Seattle as planned. A collective sigh of relief swept the cabin. Exhausted, Carmen slumped onto the jump seat for a moment, checking her watch. The flight was now over an hour behind schedule. She dreaded the potential wave of missed connections in Seattle, plus the complaint forms that angry passengers might submit. As the flight neared its final descent, the seatbelt sign came on. The attendants scurried to ensure carry-ons were stowed. Carmen made her way to the back rows one last time, verifying seatbelt compliance. Row 22 was quiet, with the judge gazing out the window as dark clouds parted to reveal glimpses of the Pacific Northwest coastline. Summoning her courage, Carmen leaned in. "Sir," she said softly, so as not to disturb his seatmates, "I wanted to personally apologize." He turned, brow furrowing slightly. She continued, voice trembling with sincerity, "I was rude to you earlier about the Wi-Fi and your situation. I judged you unfairly. Please forgive me. That's not the kind of service or attitude E-Star aims to provide." A flicker of understanding passed over his face. He seemed to recall that terse moment when she'd laughed. After a beat, he nodded. "I understand. Perhaps it was a stressful day for everyone, but I appreciate the apology, Carmen." His gaze was kind but steady, as though seeing through her bravado. "I hope you know people aren't always what they seem on the surface." She felt her eyes moisten. "I realize that now. Thank you for your graciousness, Your Honor." He cracked the faintest smile. "Just Mr. Howard is fine when I'm on a plane." Then the overhead speaker chimed, and the captain's voice instructed all to remain seated and prepare for landing. Their exchange ended, but relief settled in Carmen's chest. The Boeing 737 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport with a jarring bounce, prompting collective sighs of relief from the weary passengers. The seatbelt sign blinked off for the last time. People stood, grabbed their bags, and stretched cramped limbs. Carmen made her way to the front exit to bid them farewell. Typically, she was indifferent about the rush of disembarking, but today she felt an urgent sense of closure, wanting to see Judge Howard pass safely down the aisle. One by one, passengers stepped off, some smiling politely, others complaining about the delay. The judge eventually approached, briefcase in hand. He paused, turning to Carmen. "Good luck on your next flights," he said, "and thank you again for your help. If you're ever in New York, well, you never know when our paths might cross." She gave a soft laugh, genuinely this time, no trace of condescension. "Thank you, sir. Safe travels." With a nod, he walked into the jet bridge, blending with the crowd. Carmen's shoulders sagged in relief. The last passenger had left. She exhaled, feeling a swirl of gratitude and lingering embarrassment. For the first time all day, the tension in her chest loosened. The flight crew assembled to clean the cabin and collect leftover items. Patricia supervised, instructing everyone to hustle so the aircraft could be prepared for its next departure. As Carmen checked seat pockets around row 22, her stomach dropped. Judge Howard's battered wallet lay on the floor, half tucked beneath the seat. She scooped it up, heart pounding. Did he forget it? She flipped it open enough to see a driver's license, Frederick Howard. There was also a small ID badge with the New York State Unified Court System seal. He definitely needs this. She ran to the jet bridge, but the crowd had already thinned, and he was nowhere in sight. A quick dash to the gate area yielded no sign of him. Panic fluttered in her. He can't board another flight without his ID. Maybe he's still around. She hurried to the airline's help desk, breathless. The gate agent, busy reassigning seats for the next flight, barely looked up. Carmen insisted it was urgent, explaining the judge left his wallet. The agent shrugged. "We can call him on the paging system, but if he's already heading for baggage claim or a connecting flight, It might be tricky. With no time to lose, Carmen asked if there was a departing flight for Frederick Howard. The agent typed into the system, no further flights under that name. Possibly he's leaving the airport. Carmen's heart sank. She pictured him wandering the airport, realizing too late his wallet was gone. She considered how to rectify this. He's a judge. He must have some arrangement or driver waiting. But how do I find him? Impulsively, Carmen dashed through the terminal, scanning the crowds. She tried baggage claim first, weaving through throngs of travelers at the carousels. No sign of him. Next, she checked a lounge area, then the exit ramp for taxis. Time ticked by, her mind racing with worry. The wallet was crucial, containing his ID and possibly credit cards. Failing to return, it would compound her earlier negativity, overshadowing the apology she'd just given. After nearly 10 minutes of fruitless searching, she ended up by the arrival's curb, exhausted. He might have left in a taxi already. The bitter thought weighed on her. Then she spotted the businesswoman from earlier, Julia Sampson, stepping outside with a suitcase. Carmen recognized her from the first flight. She rushed forward, ignoring the throbbing in her ankle. "Excuse me, Miss Sampson." Julia turned, eyebrows arched. "Yes?" Carmen held up the wallet. "Mr. Howard left this on board. Do you know how I can reach him?" Recognizing the wallet, Julia's eyes widened. "Oh my gosh, that's his. I just parted ways with him near the escalators. I think he's heading to the main terminal to catch a rental car or meet a colleague from the conference." "Where exactly?" Carmen asked, scanning the crowd. Julia pointed back inside, near a corridor leading to the rental car counters. "He might be that way. I'm sure he'll realize it soon if he tries to rent a car without ID." Carmen thanked her, sprinting back inside. Adrenaline flooded her veins. She raced toward the corridor, searching left and right. There, near a row of vacant seats, stood Judge Howard, patting his blazer pockets with a perplexed frown. Carmen nearly skidded to a stop beside him. "Mr. Howard, Judge Howard," she gasped, chest heaving. "You left your wallet on the plane." She held it out, pulse thundering. Relief flooded his face. He accepted the wallet, exhaling in thanks. "I was in a panic. I realized it was gone a minute ago." Opening it, he confirmed everything was there. "I can't believe I forgot it." He looked at Carmen. "You came all this way to return it?" She nodded, breathless. I didn't want you stranded. Plus, I felt I owed you more than just a verbal apology." He studied her for a moment. Then, with a warm smile, he closed the wallet. "You know, Miss Stone Carmen, I appreciate this act of kindness. It shows real integrity." He patted the wallet. "We all make mistakes. The measure is how we respond afterward." She felt tears threaten. "I'm sorry I judged you based on appearances. I was rude and presumed so much." Her voice quavered. "I never would have guessed. You're an important judge." He shook his head gently. "Titles aside, we're all human. You did what was right today by returning this. Thank you." Traffic bustled around them as travelers hurried to connecting flights or lined up at rental car desks. Judge Howard glanced at the overhead signs. "I'd best get going. My conference is starting soon." "Will you be okay? You look exhausted." Carmen gave a small, sheepish laugh, realizing how disheveled she must appear, her T-shirt uniform top, her hair undone, face flushed from running. "I'm fine. My shift is technically over once I hand over to another crew. I just have to handle some paperwork for E-Star." She paused, summoning a half smile. "I'm glad you got your wallet back." He nodded. "You, Miss Stone, have proven that first impressions aren't the whole story. Thank you again. Perhaps our paths will cross under better circumstances someday." With that, he extended his hand. She shook it, grateful for the unspoken forgiveness. Then, adjusting his briefcase, he strode off toward the rental counters, soon disappearing into the swirl of travelers. Carmen stood there, heart still racing from her sprint. A swirl of emotions, relief, gratitude, lingering shame coursed through her veins. At least I did the right thing in the end. Perhaps that, in its own small way, was the best closure she could hope for. When Carmen returned to East Star's station, Patricia cornered her. "Where did you run off to? We're short on time to prepare the plane for its next flight. They needed you for final checks." Carmen held her tongue, uncertain how much to explain. "A passenger left something on board, and I delivered it." Patricia's brow furrowed in annoyance, but she relented. "Fine. Make it quick next time. We're not your personal errand service." Rolling her eyes, she handed Carmen a stack of forms to finalize. Sinking into a chair by the gate, Carmen completed the forms, exhaustion weighing on her. She replayed the day's events, from the frantic morning rush to the humiliating soda spill, from mocking a passenger's lack of funds to discovering his real status. The immediate karma of her soaked uniform, the redemption of comping his Wi-Fi, returning his wallet at the last second. Life can twist unexpectedly, she thought. One moment you scorn someone, the next you're rushing through a crowd to save him from a major inconvenience. The experience had changed her perspective. Perhaps she'd approach the next flight with greater humility, seeing each passenger as an individual, not just a seat number or a wallet's worth. Carmen's shift ended later that evening, after assisting the new crew's transition. She trudged through the airport corridors, thinking about how she'd retell the day's saga to her best friend, or perhaps keep it to herself as a humbling secret. She recalled Judge Howard's words, titles aside, "We're all human." This sentiment resonated deeply. The flight attendant job, she realized, often required snap judgments who might need an upgrade, who might pose security risks, who might cause trouble. Yet that survival skill had morphed into cynicism. She thought of the passenger meltdown in row 20, the dismayed families, the exhausted business travelers. Everyone carried burdens. The least she could do was greet them with compassion. Arriving at the airport exit, she spotted the bright neon sign for the taxis. She mentally tallied her finances. The day had been so chaotic, she never ate lunch. She had enough left for a decent meal or a taxi home. Weighing her twisted ankle against her desire to save money, she eventually hailed a cab. "Being frugal is wise," she mused. "There's no shame in counting pennies, just as there's no virtue in judging people by their belongings." The next morning, after a long restorative sleep, Carmen checked her East Star email, expecting the usual schedule updates. Her eyes widened at a message from the corporate customer relations department. The subject line read, "Passenger feedback flight 2287. She braced herself for the worst. Perhaps the meltdown passenger had lodged a complaint. Opening it, she found a brief note praising her for going above and beyond to assist a passenger with a left-behind item. The note indicated that the passenger specifically mentioned Carmen by name, commending her honesty and quick action. The message concluded with, "We appreciate your dedication to passenger satisfaction. Keep up the excellent work." Relief and gratitude pooled in her chest. She guessed it must be Judge Howard who'd sent in the feedback. He must have praised her last-minute wallet rescue, overshadowing any recollection of her earlier rudeness. She felt a wave of humility. He's too kind to mention the negative part. She resolved never to forget this lesson. In the weeks that followed, Carmen noticed a subtle but significant shift in her approach. She treated each passenger with renewed empathy, whether they dressed in designer clothes or scuffed shoes, whether they requested extra cookies or fiddled uncertainly with their phone payment apps. On some flights, she'd recall Judge Howard's mild, understanding demeanor. On others, she'd remember the stinging humiliation of that spilled soda. Both moments spurred her to remain professional, gracious, and open-minded. East Star's management also introduced new policies for in-flight purchases, streamlining payment methods, and training attendants to handle technical glitches with more patience. Carmen gladly adopted these improvements. seeing them as a chance to ensure nobody else faced the embarrassment or frustration that once unsettled Judge Howard. Months later, Carmen was working a routine shuttle flight from Boston Logan to New York. LaGuardia, a quick one-hour hop. She'd just finished the pre-flight checks and was greeting passengers at the door when an older gentleman stepped aboard. He wore a neat but modest suit. At first, Carmen didn't recognize him. He wasn't wearing the tweed blazer, but as he looked up from his boarding pass, their eyes met, and a jolt of recognition electrified her. "Carmen," he said warmly, a small smile curling his lips. She blinked. "Judge Howard," she replied. "It's good to see you again." He laughed softly. "Back to plain old Mr. Howard. I'm only judge in court. How have you been?" Carmen found herself genuinely smiling. "I'm well, thank you. And you?" "Very good. Busy, but that's life. I've got a hearing in Manhattan this evening, so here I am." She guided him to a seat in business class this time. Apparently he booked a more comfortable spot. "Have a pleasant flight," she said quietly, feeling a sense of closure. If he had chosen economy, she thought, she'd have treated him no differently. Lesson learned. That brief interaction set the tone for Carmen's day. It was a reminder that behind every passenger was a story, a judge, a teacher, a parent, a student, a person who deserved respect. No more mocking or judging a traveler's clothes or wallet. She worked the short flight with a light heart, offering a genuine smile to everyone. When they landed in LaGuardia, Judge Howard disembarked, giving her an amiable nod that felt like a final testament to her growth. Over time, Carmen's reputation for thoughtful service improved. She became the go-to for new hires, an example of how to handle unexpected situations with grace. And in a quiet corner of her mind, she kept the memory of that humiliating day, her unkind laugh at a poor passenger, the spilled soda, and the revelation that the passenger was, in fact, a respected judge. Life had swiftly corrected her scorn, teaching a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Indeed, sometimes immediate karma is more than just cosmic justice. It's a chance for change. And for Carmen Stone, that day marked the end of her careless assumptions and the beginning of a more compassionate career in the skies. Thank you for joining us on this journey of mistaken assumptions, humility, and redemption. If you found the story compelling, please click the like button and consider sharing it with friends or family who might appreciate its message. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more dramatic tales that encourage us to look beyond appearances and recognize the quiet stories behind every interaction. Your support helps us continue bringing you content that entertains, surprises, and reminds us how one encounter, even on an airplane, can change a life's course. We appreciate your time, and we hope to see you again soon in our next flight of imagination. Safe travels.